Hey everyone, and welcome to the Mill Valley Contenders season conversation for one of my absolute favorite movies of the year. That movie is Palm Springs. So excited to moderate today's Q&A with our filmmakers. So without further ado, let's welcome producer Becky Sloviter. Hello, Becky.
Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for having us.
Editor Matt Friedman. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
We have Cristin Milioti. Hello, Cristin.
Hi.
And Andy Samberg. Say hello, Andy.
Hi.
So excited to be here. So first of all, this movie is absolutely one of the very, very best films of the year. To start with you, Cristin, how proud are you of this film and the way it has resonated all year long?
I'm sort of blown away by the life that this film has had. I mean, it's really wild that like almost a year ago, in 2 weeks, we were all at Sundance. We were all there in this like house together, being like, "Oh, I hope it gets bought." And a year later, we're still on all these Zooms talking about it. We're still like, so many people have seen it. So many people have really like loved it and enjoyed it, and that's like the most you can ask, really.
How about for you, Andy? I mean, I was in the room at the library at the Sundance Film Festival when it had its world premiere, and talk about a reaction that went through the roof. Now, as an actor and as producer, what did you think? Like, what was your reaction to that?
I remember actually Matt and I talking about it, that we knew there were certain laugh points that we were like holding our breath for, but that as the movie went on, there's like, sections where it gets a little more grounded and a little more serious, and then there's joke points that come back, and little things were getting big laughs. And Matt leaned over to me and he was like, "They're paying attention. They're laughing at all the little stuff. The story's working." And I remember in that moment being like, "Nice, we did it." Like, I was like, this could be the end of the Palm Springs story. Like, we got into Sundance and it played great, and people thought that it was a story that worked, And so kind of everything since that moment has been cake. Like, it was a hard movie to make, truly an indie. And everyone really busted their ass to get it to a place that felt like maybe even a little bit more. And it's been kind of a dream.
Becky, I want to ask you, this is your first film as a full-on producer. How and why this film for your first, but also going off of Andy's comment there, what made it a hard film to produce?
It was an indie through and through, as Andy said. And, when your ambition for the film doesn't exactly match up with your budget, as I think really on an indie, but also really that's any movie, right? So it becomes resource allocation and what's really important and what would be nice, but we can't get. But so much of this, it really all goes back to this beautiful script that Andy Ciara wrote. We just wanted to do him proud and honor the script. And again, our ambitions were a bit bigger than our budget. So that was the biggest challenge, of course, in many ways. But this was also, I've just never been prouder to be associated with anything. So it was a challenging but incredibly rewarding experience at the end of the day.
Matt, this is your first movie, at least I'm looking at the progression of your career, and this is your first film after The Farewell. So what was it like going from The Farewell to Palm Springs, and how exhilarating was it to do a movie like this?
Well, at first look, you think those two are pretty different, but they're similar in that they both are funny and about death and really sort of like deep pain that these two were in, and those are the kinds of movies I love to cut the most. So this was a treat, and that's absolutely what attracted me to it in the script, because humor and pain, they go together. Laughter and pain go together naturally. So anytime we get to do a movie that has both is awesome.
Cristin, what was your first take, the first time you read this screenplay? Like, what went through your mind?
I remember thinking that I had never read anything like it, that I really couldn't, like, a lot of times you read scripts and you sort of know what's going to happen. Like you're reading them and you're like, oh, I bet this will come into play, and then this will come into play, and then I see, okay, and here we go, and this is how it goes. And with this, it was a lot like the experience of viewing it, actually, which is what's quite special about it, because usually you don't always get that when you're a part of something. You'll read it, and actually what the final product ends up being isn't like the script and isn't what you imagined. And this really felt like reading it, I really didn't know the twists and turns that it was taking. And I was just blown away by, you know, sort of like what Matt was saying, that you think it's one thing, you think it's this like sort of lighthearted romp and the misdirect of that and the heavy things that it deals with, but with a light hand, was also something that I really, really, really responded to. I love it.
Andy, this movie is so much. I mean, it's first of all, the framework, it makes it smart and clever, but it's funny. It is a time loop movie, but it is a romantic comedy. I mean, it is a romantic comedy, and it has depth, and it's profound, and it has a big heart. Like, what was your take on just how many different tones, how many different voices this movie has?
I guess I would say my take was it's either going to be a complete mess or one of my favorite things I've ever seen. And, you know, when I read it, it was one of my favorite things I'd ever read. And Becky and I kept talking about, man, I just keep thinking about Palm Springs. Like going into it, I knew there was a time loop element, and obviously there's been time loop stuff in the past, and I'm a huge fan of that stuff. And it caught me off guard nonetheless, because it sort of starts where those leave off. And like Cristin said, it keeps going in directions you're not expecting. And there's just a stickiness to it. I can't really put my finger on why, but I just kept thinking about it and kept being like, even when we come across production roadblocks, I was like, yeah, but we gotta make Palm Springs, right? And Becky would be like, yeah, we just gotta keep working. It's annoying, but we just gotta push through. And we wanted to see it. We wanted to see it made and see it on the screen.
You know, when you think of like the time loop movies, I mean, obviously, of course, you have Groundhog Day, but then there's also Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise, and you have Source Code with Jake Gyllenhaal. But this one is different. Like whenever I try to describe this movie and I'd say a time loop, oh, it's Groundhog Day. I'm like, no, it's not. This one is different, because this time there are two people in the loop. And Becky, like, what are the challenges to make this fresh? And what were the first conversations that you had with director Max Barbakow, and what made him the perfect director?
So Max had gone to film school actually at AFI with Andy Ciara. And so Max and Andy came to us with Max, and we loved Andy and Max immediately and really vibed with them. I think, you know, to echo a bit of what Cristin and Andy were both saying, I think one of the things I'm most proud of about this movie is it manages to be serious without taking itself too seriously. I think that's a really hard needle to thread. It has a lot on its mind, but it's also really light on its feet. You know, Andy and I would joke a lot, if you're just looking for a cool 87 minutes, you got it. And if you want something that's really going to make you think and want to talk to whoever you saw the movie with afterward about it, that was, you know, one of our goals, and why I think it really stayed with us. It was just really special from the start. And I think as Andy and I were putting it together and working on the script with Max and Andy, again, it, as Andy said, just kept kind of sticking with us, and we just couldn't stop talking about it. Our excitement for it really bubbled up.
So Matt, what your conversations with Max, how was your collaboration with Max unique and different from other filmmakers you've worked with?
Well, one of the things that I really loved about Max was the attention to detail that both he and Andy paid to the story. In the script, well, there's two Andys, so it's always like, for instance, when we first meet Roy, he grabs this little appetizer and bites into it, and it's like, tuna? And the guy goes, yeah, and he's like, and then when we meet him later, he's cooking tuna in his kitchen, so he's a tuna aficionado. And it's like, there is attention to detail that Max paid everywhere through the entire film. And in these challenged sort of true indie features where they were having to run as fast as they were running in production, that's usually the first stuff that gets dropped by the wayside. I've worked on so many of them that were great at the script stage, and then they just hit the production roadblocks and couldn't capture what was so unique in the script. And however, you know, they did it on set, I wasn't there, I don't go to set. They got everything.
Here, just to piggyback on that a little bit, Andy and Cristin and the rest of our amazing cast often had 2, maybe 3 takes at most. You know, it was, they knew their characters inside and out, and even the actors who had 2 to 3 lines, it was so impressive to see everyone just really all hands on deck. And I think, you know, that's a testament to Max as well.
Yeah, I think that the tuna example for Max is so on point, because it speaks to a bigger thing about the movie in general, which is, you know, they always talk about, like, when you watch like a far future sci-fi movie or something, it sort of lives and dies on the world building. And I would equate this with that in many ways. There was a lot of depth and texture to the world, and I think it's partly because they wrote so many drafts before it ever even got to us, but there's backstory to everything, and it's just sort of simmering under the surface and makes it all feel really like exciting and interesting and better for repeat viewing.
But interestingly, this film doesn't explain a lot of the backstory. Like, it's there.
It's just there.
It never goes into it, which is another thing that I loved about it.
Yeah.
I love that everything happens in a weird way, because it you know, does jump back and forth in time and everything, but everything is so natural and organic. And, you know, Cristin, I want to ask, you know, like, when you're doing a movie like this, and there's so many, again, the framework is so different and unique in its own way. The chemistry that you have to have with your co-star is essential. So tell me about the first time you and Andy met, the first like scene you did together, when you really felt like, we got this.
Well, I think that that's another thing, and Matt can speak to this, that's the magic of editing, because we had no chemistry.
They can't stand each other.
Oh,
Out of the bag.
It was a very sort of, I would work with his stand-in because he refused to be there past 2 p.m. and then he would work with mine because he just sort of makes me uncomfortable in general. So that's really the beauty of post.
It was a blade sitch.
What did you say? Right?
What? I didn't say anything about Blade.
Is that how they filmed Blade?
I've heard there was a lot of acting with a stunt double on Blade.
Yeah. No, I just
could be a lot.
I think that those things are like sort of a bit it is so hard to make a movie, obviously. Like, it's so hard for so many, it's so hard to make anything, but for so many things to come together in the right way and for everyone to be on the same page. And like, as far as chemistry goes, that I have always sort of felt like that's one of those things that it's either there or it's not. You can judge it for sure. You know, I've shown up to a couple things where I've been like, uh-oh, and then we've judged it. We've found our way through.
You judged it.
You judge it, you get in and you're like, this is my job. We're going to figure this out. We'll find a way. You know, but this was like with Andy, it just sort of, we always had like a real beautiful rapport. And that was, I think, just part of like, I don't know what, like the fairy dust of it all. I don't know. I can't give you like a better explanation. I think that's what it was.
Yeah. It's just luck. It's luck. You meet someone sometimes in life and you feel like you've been friends for a long time when you haven't. Yeah. And we were lucky that was the case with this, where the 2 people were supposed to seem like they were really good friends on camera too.
Yeah.
Andy, what was the framework of the movie in terms of like, what was the first scene that you shot? Did you shoot, I don't know, chronologically in some way, and just you know, and then Matt goes in and figures it out in the editing? I mean, it just watching this movie get made would be a great movie unto itself. So what was the first scene you shot, and how many times did you shoot that scene?
First stuff we shot, I think, was Cristin waking up in bed over and over again on different days of the loop.
Yeah.
And then like busting into the bathroom and yelling at Abe. And
it was my nightmare to have that scene on the
very first.
Like the worst thing you could get as an actor is the schedule where they're like, here you go. And on your first day where you're like figuring out where the bathrooms are and like who to sit with at lunch is like the scene that's like, oh, you mean the emotion, like one of the emotional cruxes? Got it. Like there's no like warming up.
It was tough. I will say we did a pretty good job considering how jammed the schedule was of giving some of the bigger emotional scenes more time in the schedule.
Yeah.
We did not shoot chronologically by any stretch. That was never going to happen because so much of it being a time loop movie, we were boarding things at the same location and they'd be for, you know, a million different moments of that day over and over again. But for the characters, their story is emotionally changing. So you shoot like, you know, 15 different scenes at the wedding all at once, but it's going over the course of the movie. We would try to shoot those chronologically, sort of like work your way through the script. And that was helpful, certainly. But, you know, we were doing like stuff at the end of the movie the first or second week. And
but to piggyback onto Becky said earlier, like, I do think that some of the, like one of the challenges of this was the fact that we did move so fast. Like the ambitions for the film were so big. And so, yeah, like a lot of times it meant you got like 2 or 3 takes, but sort of like the madness of that did sort of, you kind of had to like, you had to swing for the fences or else you learned very quickly that like there was no like warming up. And I actually think that in the end, like that energy is in there, that you're just, it's like a rocket ship. Cause we were like on a rocket ship. It was just like action. And then like you blacked out and 21 days later, they were like, you're done. Like, I don't know, like it was wild.
Well, that thought, wait, 21 days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very short
21
shoot.
or 22, Becky?
22.
22. Sorry.
But one of those days was sort of a half day because we had to drive to Joshua Tree.
And what a drive it was. Yes. Yeah. But I mean, Cristin, to piggyback on Kristin's piggyback, you hear people talk about actors as consummate professionals, but really no warming up, no, can I take that again? Like we just didn't have time to bleed. And everyone, I think this is when you realize how fortunate you are that everyone's making the same movie, because that doesn't always happen either. And I think, you know, Andy and Cristin, of course, most predominantly just could roll with it, could use that frenzy at times. And, you know, as Cristin said, you can see it on screen. That energy at times.
Becky, did you just was that a Predator reference?
It sure was. And
Jesse Ventura and Predator. I ain't got time to bleed.
Just for you. Yes, exactly.
Now, I'm going to piggyback on Becky, piggybacking on Cristin.
Well,
please do.
To say that not only that, but you know, as an editor, I saw these two feed off each other. So it wasn't just getting what was on the script. It was like so much stuff and so much improv and so many options that we had in the cutting room for everything. You know, like in the cockpit, when they're about to crash the plane, there's a million different things that we could have put into the movie. Like that's the hard part about editing, I think. Right. You know, it is choosing, okay, well, we have 10 really great funny things. We got to kill 9.
And those 10 funny things were gotten inside of 12 minutes, really. Yeah. It was crazy.
Well, just to piggyback off of Becky and Matthew. By the way, let's keep the piggybacking going. This is great. I love it.
Why ever walk again?
So the question is like, with such a fast shoot, I'm floored that you had just over 21, 22 days to shoot because the movie, the reason I am floored is because it looks so polished. It looks like a studio film. I mean, it looks like just you had maybe 3 times that much time. But when you have that short period of time and you're doing a movie like this, how much risk taking did you do? How much improv? How many different things did you try? And how fun was that to work in that way? Cristin, I want to start with you on that.
Well, I think that also was such a blessing of really from like everyone on this film, the crew, the cast, every single person was there because they believed in it. And so I think that like in the moments when we would have ideas for things like the tattoo, when we tattoo each other, like that was something that we stole as the sun was setting because we'd like been talking about it, and our makeup artist Galaxy like jumped in with like a makeshift pen and was like, oh, I can rig that. And everyone was always so game, even at the pace that we were going, which was brutal, but like everyone was always willing to jump in if it was like for the sake of a joke or for the sake of a beat in there. And that is also what makes it so special. I don't know, that was like what came to mind. And that's very rare because I think, you know, none of us were there for the money, obviously. We're all there because we really loved it, and I think that shows up there as well.
Andy, what's it like for you to work at that pace? You find it like exhilarating and like empowering to just like, you know, let's just go. You feel like the energy elevates your performance?
I think so. I mean, I'm used to it, frankly. I did, you know, like 7 million digital shorts at SNL where you don't have time and it's airing in an hour and you're still shooting and you're like, we're gonna die. So, like, it's still hard for me to really feel rattled in terms of schedule. On this one, as a producer, I was stressed in a different way because I was like, oh shit, like we're really like on set trying to figure out what scenes we gotta cut while I'm learning this scene and it needs to be good. And, you know, there was a different level of it for that. But as far as performance goes, I was just super excited about it because I loved the scenes and I loved working with the cast that we got. We got so lucky with everybody. And
Yeah.
I have to say, I know we're not like accepting an award here, but Q Tran, who was our DP, you mentioned how great the movie looks. Her and the lighting team that she sort of brought in kicked ass. Like when we first met with her, Becky and I said to her, we have this much money and we want it to look like we have this much money. And she did it, you know, and she did it by really, really working it out with Max and thinking of really cool dynamic ways to shoot. And she also did it by calling in a million favors. So we got lucky in a lot of senses because people really liked the material. So they were like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. This should be fun. And we like Q.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. She was so tireless, and we could tell that from our meeting, and we'd been a fan of hers. But you know, when you're grinding it out, when you're on day 17 and it's night shoots, you know, with Andy and I keep joking about his next wedding movie we make will be set during the day. Thank you very much. We didn't clock that ahead of time, but yes. And Cristin and I would drive home at 5 a.m. It was brutal, and Q was tireless. So her talent is sort of equal to her work ethic. She's so great.
Matt, I want to ask, like, when you're working on a film, especially a film like this, how much goes into like what you consider about what the audience is thinking?
Everything. Like that's really the sum total on my job, is thinking about, you know, because ultimately we knew we wanted to get to a certain spot. We wanted to get people laughing and we wanted to get people sad and moved, those emotional responses. So at every step of the way through the cutting process, we were talking about that and what is the best way to get there. And, you know, my understanding, like we mentioned earlier, where the backstory is not always put on the screen, it's a lot of discussions between, you know, me and Max and Andy in his role as producer about what that backstory is, because I wasn't there through the script development and I needed, you know, to know that. So like when Sarah asked Niles what he did in the prior life and he answers, you know, I don't know. Like I remember, Andy, I turned to you because you happened to be in the cutting room that day. And I said, are you lying or are you telling the truth?
Yeah.
And you were like, well, we want to leave it vague. We don't want to let people know, but, and then he answered, because, you know, we need to know that in order to get the performances to the point where they feel genuine so that people will actually feel the things that the characters are going through. So yeah, it's all about that. Like, it's much more about what is the audience thinking and what are they feeling and making room for those emotions, than worrying about, say, you know, logistics of the time loop. which we did also.
Yeah.
And how?
One of my favorite things though about this film are the ambiguities about, like, you actually don't need to know that much about you know, you're given just enough to know where they're coming from. Like, you don't have to know exactly what my marriage was like, or like what my relationship with my mom was, and now what my relationship with my dad is now that he has like a new family. Like, it's all there, but you never like go into the gritty details. And that's actually one of my favorite parts about it.
Me
It's
too.
not weighed down by it, but it's
Yeah.
all there.
I feel like this movie is for people who like that, and we are all those people. So it really was a good fit.
Okay, well, I gotta ask, because I gotta know what's up with the dinosaurs. I need an answer. Please tell me.
Well, it's open to interpretation. That's definitely one of the moments that we're talking about. And
Yeah.
there's a number of moments in this movie, and we talked about it in our first meeting with Ciara and with Max, that are meant to invite a conversation between people who have seen it, and thereby reveal things about people and who they are and what their worldview is, kind of their general state of being and outlook on how they interpret it and what they get out of it. So even within our, creative cocoon that we like to call it, there were varying opinions on what some of those things meant. The dinosaurs, the ending, whether or not Niles does or doesn't remember, things like that, that it speaks exactly to what Cristin was saying. I think it's miraculous that we were able to do that, and so many people got that that's what we were going for. It's really, really gratifying feeling.
Yeah.
One other thing on that is, how many different endings did you actually shoot?
97. And it was a real fight figuring it out. No,
I'll
we
say
did
this.
have a lot of alt endings.
I'll say this.
Yeah.
There were no endings that were shot that weren't in that pool. You know what I mean? They were all there. It was just all
Right.
versions on the dialogue, different takes on what it did or didn't like convey.
Right. And different like other elements. But all of it.
How long was your first cut of this movie, and how many different cuts of the movie did you put together?
Like the very, very first rough cut was really long, over 2 hours, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But that was rough. It was almost like an assembly. And then, there were many, many edits. We did a lot of screenings. We did a lot of small screenings for friends and family to sort of fine tune. I don't know. I don't even know really how to quantify how many edits there were.
Well, yeah, a lot. I think we were up to when we got to the point where we were numbering versions of reels, I think probably up in the high 20s. And then each of those things would have countless iterations, because those were just like landmarks of when we would screen or show to somebody.
We definitely worked it in post. We really got in. Yeah.
The fine tuning and the attention to detail that any, process is going to be. I think on this one, because of all the detail, as Matt was referencing, that comes from the script and all the little things, something Andy and I talked about constantly was repeated viewings. We wanted it to be rewarding to the viewer who comes back again. And so the final product that's out there is not actually that different than one that we had a month prior to going to Sundance, but the fine tuning, to us, it's actually quite a bit different.
Well, the good news is this. So in over the summer, the movie dropped on Hulu, and Becky, to your point, I have watched this movie now 9 times on Hulu, including last night. I know, Cristin, I know you
God
think.
bless you. Thank you.
That's
I've
amazing.
seen it more.
Well, of course you have to see it more.
You've seen it the most.
But I have seen this movie 9 times, not only because I just think that, I get things out of it, and I love that I'm still questioning certain things about the film, like obviously like the dinosaur, but it makes me happy. And I feel like this year we needed a good laugh, something to make us happy. And Cristin, the movie is seen in a completely different framework after April. What's your take on that?
I mean, we could never have known. You mean because we're all repeating the same day over and over again, right?
Exactly.
For a second, I was like, did something else happen in April? Yeah, it's like, but no, we're talking about the thing. Yeah, I mean, we would never obviously have known, but like, talked about this in other interviews. I think what is so incredible about the mechanism of a time loop is that it's almost superfluous. Like Andy Ciara said once that this movie can be interpreted as an allegory for depression, that like when you can't get out of the same way of thinking about your life. And that's what I thought when I read it, which is obviously was like a year and a half before the pandemic. I was like, oh, this is about not being able to like escape yourself and what you think your life should be or should have been, or what you've done wrong, or where you lost your path. And so obviously it took on a whole nother level when like no one could leave their homes and we all felt like we were stuck with no end in sight. I mean, I can't believe that we were lucky enough to release something not only that we cared so much about, but that from what I understand has really, like you said, like people have been able to laugh and also feel understood by it because of the getting trapped. So I mean, was just an added like layer of sort of the crazy journey that this movie has gone on.
Andy, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting juxtaposition because on the one hand, obviously, it's just been a nightmare for everyone, the quarantining and the pandemic and everything. And on the other side of it, for us, it's been really nice, like Cristin said, to have the movie be received so well. And when it's conflated in a positive way with something so horrible, it's kind of hard. It's a very mixed feeling you have, which I guess is perfect for the movie because the movie is that too. It gives you kind of both. So I don't know. I mean, it's anytime you make something, you're really just kind of hoping that people watch it and that they like it. So whatever circumstances have led us to that, I'm really happy and glad.
Could not think of a better way to bring this conversation to a close. I gotta tell you, every year on November 9th, make sure you watch Palm Springs, because it's just such a wonderful film. I want to thank everybody for this amazing conversation on behalf of the Mill Valley Contenders season. Matt Friedman, Becky Sloviter, Andy Samberg, Cristin Milioti. Thank you so very much, and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Happy New Year to you. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Shout out Bay Area.